Welcome to the fourth branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Ignorance is neither private nor personal. It places a very heavy burden on society. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. It is, however, the ignorance of the ignorance which represents the greatest danger to society. It is what turns an ignorant man into a lunatic. Thus lies the danger, the peril even of a man, a community, a state, a country, yes, even a society. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Indeed, it does. We've seen it, have we not? We've witnessed it. We are all living it, are we not? All men are born ignorant. Many have chosen to stay and live in ignorance. Only a few recognize ignorance is indeed the root and stem of all evil and choose to be ignorant no more. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the fourth branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, answer the following two questions. Question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, question 1. Would you entrust your teenage daughter to a non-rapist? Question 2. Would you have a non-pedophile cared for your toddler? Your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if both of your answers are absolutely not, this program is catered exclusively to you. You should stick around. It is enlightening, educational, and informative. Join me here on the fourth branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the fourth branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment. Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth branch program. I am MD. Today we will continue a discussion about two very important topics that impact the whole country, which is the topic democracy in America and of course war on blacks. And the subtopic today for the war on blacks is slave trades. But first, let's tackle what I would consider the most important topic, democracy in America. For quite some time now, I have been writing about crisis in America under the title America in Crisis. I blog about it, I write about it, I talk about it. In fact, sometimes I feel that I'm exhausted talking about it. Now, for the past 2 years, most everything that happened in the country, everybody points finger to one single individual, of course, Donald Trump, the President of the United States. Now, it is no surprise or no shocking revelation to anyone living in the United States of America to hear that Donald Trump has exacerbated any problem that the country had prior. No matter which part of the issue you look at, it is not getting any better. Now, it is easy to simply point to the current president and say he is responsible for all that. There is one specific aspect that Donald Trump is responsible for, but is not alone. When Donald Trump bid for the office of the presidency of the United States, as I mentioned yesterday during the expose, I was probably the first individual who actually encouraged the idea of a Donald Trump candidate for the presidency of the United States. To put it in perspective for you, I wrote the first article about the idea being a very good idea before the first debate, the first Republican debate, meaning at the very early stage. The first debate actually happened in Las Vegas, if I'm not mistaken. Before the first debate, I wrote an article which clearly said that the Donald Trump candidacy for the presidency of the United States is actually a good thing. Now, I say that for a very simple reason. Most individuals who have heard me talking about the presidency of the United States have no context as to where I come from in terms of why I take specific position in regards to the current president of the United States. I do not have a political party. I do not get myself affiliated with any political party. However, I believe that I'm wise enough to see when someone is going the wrong way for me not to go down the same path. So, despite the fact that in the very beginning, I encouraged the idea of a Donald Trump candidacy, I also have to point out that also very early on, despite the fact that I predicted that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee for the Republican Party, and by early on, I really mean early on. In fact, more than 3 months before it happened. It is all documented. Now, I didn't call for Donald Trump to become the nominee. I simply was able to predict based on how I saw that the debates, the campaigning was going on. I was able to call the Republican nomination for Donald Trump. And it wasn't just about Donald Trump. I did that for a number of other candidates who dropped out here and there, and as well as predicting that Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee for the Democrat Party. I just want to put some context into when I speak about a particular topic so you can get a sense as to where I'm coming from. Now, it wasn't difficult for me at all very early on to realize that although it was good for Donald Trump to be among those vying for the presidency of the United States, but very early on, I cringe at the idea that Donald Trump would become the next president of the United States. Two completely different topics. And I want to make certain that there is a good level of understanding as to not only the difference between I encourage his candidacy versus I cringe at the idea of him becoming the next president of the United States before all that happened. And the reason is because, as I mentioned earlier, that it is not difficult for me to look at an individual behavior, words, and past and be able to bring some logical conclusion in regards to how that person is going to fare. I don't have a crystal ball to see that, but despite the fact that, for instance, if you invest in mutual fund, you usually would receive a prospectus and a very important clause in the prospectus showing you that that mutual fund, that family of mutual fund has been doing extremely well, but they always have a disclaimer that past performance does not guarantee future performance or earning. That's for mutual fund, for stock, and so on. Individuals, on the other hand, their behavior, their ways dictate how they're going to behave in various situations. Especially when you have decades of that type of behavior and information to look at it is very rare that you would find that the individual would be a completely different individual. That's why you probably, if you watch, for instance, people commit crime, there is a very high likelihood that after an individual commits a crime, that if that individual is not caught immediately, watching the places that he or she is used to is a good prediction that you can catch that individual, because those people will always go back to familiar places, to familiar people. That's a good predictor of where to find that individual you're looking for. And of course, people in law enforcement already know that. Now, I said all that in order to make it clear that I did not have any reservation as to what I know Donald Trump would become tomorrow if elected president. That's why at the very early part of the election, I was screaming at the top of my lungs to pray that Mr. Trump didn't get anywhere with his candidacy. Yes, I encourage it because it was necessary to have someone that forced various issues to be brought to the surface for discussion, to be debated, and for other candidates who may not have thought about it, who may have not cared about it, candidates who may have simply continued on their standard de facto ways of doing business, then Donald Trump was a good catalyst to force that. In my analysis, that was the end of the story, not Donald Trump, President of the United States. And I wrote about it several times and screaming at the top of my lungs. But unfortunately, as it was pretty obvious, many people, millions of them, believed the lies that Donald Trump told them, as if they expected him to become a different individual. I must say, in all fairness, a number of Republicans as well who did not approve of Donald Trump, even as the nominee for the Republican Party, they too were pushing against the idea of Donald Trump becoming president. But as soon as he became the nominee, they start reasoning that maybe, just maybe, he will change if he becomes president. You may recall that even Obama thought so, that the office of the presidency will humble Donald Trump. I never did. As mentioned, individual behaviors still in decades worth of those type of behavior and ways of life do not get changed overnight. Especially Donald Trump is an old person. He's set in his ways. So I never believed a second that Donald Trump was going to change. And because of that, I always knew right off the bat that Donald Trump will be a president who continue to use illegal, illegitimate ways to do things. Because that's what he's used to. That's what he's done all his life. And there was no other way for him to operate. You do not just change overnight because you acquire a new title or a new position. Donald Trump is used to doing wrong things, to doing bad things, to go and do things in fact, he has built a life of lies and deception not by accident, because if you look at the way that Donald Trump structured his business, it is something that he thought through. Now, whether his father helped him in the process, I'm not in any position to say, but the way that his business was structured was to make certain that no matter how much you try to look into the kind of crooked thing that he was doing, you would have a hard time finding that out. That's why IRS never could pin him down, because it would require a huge amount of resources to figure those things out. So those things weren't done by accident. Now, I don't have access to those type of complexity of structuring his business so that people do not get to it. But what I have access to is information about how it deals with situation, predicament, whenever he get caught, whenever he get cornered, how he manage his way out. So it was, for me, a good predictor that Donald Trump will be such an individual as president of the United States. Translation: our country will be in serious trouble. But what happened with Donald Trump is only not even half of the story, but 1/4 or even 1/10 of the story. And the reason I say that is because the framers of the Constitution know that at any point in time, the country may have someone as president of the United States who is either incompetent, a crook, someone who simply should not have been elected president. As such, the framers of the Constitution did set the structure of our government to deal with that predicament. That's why we have a legislative body, Congress and the Senate, and we have the Supreme Court. Both of those branches, all three branches of government, are equal, which means the president cannot tell the legislative body what to do. He has to work with the legislative body as well as with the judiciary body. But what the framers of the Constitution must have never thought about or envisioned is to have a political party that has completely abandoned the notion of patriotism and relinquish their duty to uphold the Constitution of the United States. As such, the past 2 years, while we may point finger at Donald Trump because he's president of the United States, but we have to ask ourselves the question, how could we have 290 members of a political party? I suppose that's what it was, because I'm not sure of the exact number, that Republicans were in control of the House, Congress, and the Senate. Well, for the Congress, or for the Senate rather, I believe it was just 51. 51. Yeah, 51. Slight margin in the Senate, but a much larger margin in Congress. So the framers of the Constitution must have never thought that there would be any time in the history of the country that there would be a political party that not just an individual or two, but a whole political party that would simply abandon the notion of patriotism. Now, as much as Republicans would like to claim they're patriot, their action for the past 2 years clearly indicate just the opposite. Because you cannot be a patriot in name. A patriot is someone who actually does sacrifice his or her own interest for the sake of the country. And we saw for the past 2 years, none of that happened. That's why I always tell people, Don't tell me what you are. Show me. Because tell me you're a patriot doesn't do anything. Your action clearly show that you know patriot. Because that's the whole point of the way that the framers of our country, that's why they structured the government the way that they did. So that those who are patriot would rise when there are things that predicament as such as this that happen to the country. So democracy in America is indeed in serious jeopardy, not just because of Donald Trump. Yes, we can blame Donald Trump all we want. And we have done that. We have pointed fingers at him as being the individual who have collaborated with an enemy state. But we cannot just point fingers at Donald Trump because Donald Trump alone could not have put the country in the predicament it is today without the help of the whole Republican body. And we cannot call that politics. That's what we use in order to justify everything that we're doing, that politicians are doing wrong. They call it politics. Because it's easier to say that in order to be able to pin one group against the other. Because if you say Democrats are bad, so no matter what scandalous thing, unscrupulous thing that Republicans do, then the Republican constituent will continue to back them up because, you know, it's between Democrats and Republicans. There are two very distinct groups of people, actually three very distinct groups of people in the country. There are those who create problems. There are those who ignore the problem, and there are those who are trying the best that they can to solve the problems. Now, the first two groups, those who create and those who ignore, outnumber those who are trying to solve the problem. That's why we still have this problem in the United States. Now, it should be no surprise to anyone in the country that Donald Trump, from the very onset, has collaborated with Russia. That is not a matter for debate. Now, you may have ignored it. It's possible that you may have ignored that, but all the signs were there. And the idea of people coming forward to defend Donald Trump over his collaboration with an enemy state, especially when you have Republican legislators who pretend to be dumb, stupid, and defending these acts. Now, those same individuals would turn around and say they are patriots. Now, the country has fell in two fronts. Because that's what put our democracy in such serious jeopardy. The framers set a structured a government that would more or less put checks and balances in the way things are done. Because anyone with power would be most inclined to abuse the power. As such, the president of the United States, the most powerful man, would most likely would like to abuse that power. That's why that individual must know that the legislative body would hold him accountable for going overboard. That's why the legislative body has the power to impeach the president of the United States, to hold him accountable. That's why Congress has the purse, so to speak. So the president may want to spend money like a drunk individual, but in order to do so, the president has to collaborate with Congress and explain what he intends to do with money. So the structure was set in such a way to make the country work. But it can only work if each branch of the government does the job the way that it was structured to do. But when you have a branch that simply decide, hey, I don't care, or become part of the problem, then we have a problem. And that's the reason today the country has a problem. Now, I mentioned earlier that it is no speculation that Donald Trump has been pretty much putting it out there that he is in bed with an enemy state before there was any knowledge of investigation, before there was any before Donald Trump even became president of the United States. We know that Donald Trump was in bed with the enemy. He said it out loud. We chose to ignore it. He didn't mince words. He didn't hide. And that's what makes it so outrageous that you have an individual who vies for the highest office in the land is so nonchalant about saying that I want to be in bed with the enemy. He said very out loud, not once, not twice, several times. He is kind of, and the reason I brought that today is because there are 44 senators, former senators, both Democrat and Republican, who wrote an op-ed, and they actually sounding the alarm that our democracy is in jeopardy. Now, this is 2018. Now, I sounded that alarm in 2016, more specifically, July and August of 2016. I've been sounding that alarm. In fact, I will show you shortly that most of the communication about the state of the republic, I pretty much stay with just writing about those things. I didn't use video to talk about the state of affairs in the country. I used to simply write about those things. And during the presidential race, July 2016, the election wasn't there yet, just a few months away. I will show you very quickly what I talked about, and we will continue this conversation about the 44 senators who wrote an op-ed and sounding the alarm about the fact that today, for the past 2 years, we have had a legislative body controlled fully by the Republican, but completely careless about the state of affairs in the country. But what makes it worse is the fact that all those individuals, which we will continue tomorrow, because we have to jump to the next topic and talk about the slave trades. So we will quickly show you a 3-minute video. The first time that I actually decided to speak instead of just writing, because to me it was that important, it was that serious, it was that critical to warn the country not to fall for those kind of things. At that time, we did not know that Julian Assange was working for the Russian. We did not have that piece of information, but we know that Julian Assange was interfering into our election. Now, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. July 2016. That was the first time I wrote an article. And as you can see, the article says SOS, US democracy is in jeopardy. That was the first time I combined the writing of an article along with the first video that I put out there to warn the country about what we about to do. And the context is Julian Assange started to warn, to threaten rather, about putting information out there that are damaging to Hillary Clinton. And the minute that information came out, the Republican as a whole, those who support Donald Trump, they were cheering at the news. They were encouraging the news. They wanted the news. And Donald Trump himself did propose that there is going to be some, and that's the part where Mueller is looking into to see how much collaboration that the Donald Trump team had with Julian Assange and of course with Russia. Now, again, we did not know that there was any collaboration between Julian Assange and Russia, but we know that the acceptance of interference by a foreign individual or entity is not something that we should ever accept here to be part of our democracy. And I know from that point, we had a serious problem. Now, here's the 2-minute video. And again, as I say, we will continue that conversation tomorrow because we have to tackle the next topic. Here it is. Hi, my name is Mike Duchenne, founder of the People Branch. For over 3 years now, I have been sharing my thoughts, my ideas, publish my comments on many political and social issues, usually in writing. Today, However, I find it absolutely necessary, extremely important, to verbalize my opinions in regards to the presidential election. See, much too much is at stake. No, it's not about Donald Trump. It's not about Hillary Clinton either. It's about Julian Assange. He's the founder of WikiLeaks. He makes it his mission to influence the outcome of the presidential elections. Some of you may welcome the idea. Others probably dread such event. Whichever side you're on, this is very troubling. Our democracy is in serious jeopardy. Mr. Assange's ability to impact our elections is not an event any patriot American should look forward to. And it's not just about presidential election. It can impact congressional election as well. Put simply, Mr. Assange can run the United States of America the way he sees fit. We Americans cannot allow Assange, or anybody else for that matter, dictate how we run our country and who runs our country. I come to you, I need your help. I need your help to stop Mr. Assange from interfering in our election, meddling in our politics, and jeopardizing our democracy. Join the hashtag #BackOffAssange movement to stop Mr. Assange and send him back to the backwoods of Australia where he belongs. Thank you.
Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you.
order to understand the notion of racism, discrimination, and prejudice here in the United States or in any other Western European country, one must travel far, very far back to the colonial period. Put differently, follow the money. Most everything in life, in fact, everything in life seems to hinge on that very old cliche. So it should not be any surprise that a critical investigation such as the Russia's interference in our election also hinges on that very factor. Robert Mueller, since he was picked to lead the investigation, has been pretty much following the money, which would lead to wherever, whatever, whoever help explain what's going on. As such, here also at the fourth branch, in order to understand racism in America, we will travel to the colonial period, but we will use the compass of follow the money in order to get a good grasp, a good understanding as to why slavery has ended, but racism is still very much alive in America.
Don't go anywhere. The fourth branch program will return in just a moment.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to the president where it's due, but definitely coming down hard on Obama on his bigger failures, like his handling of the Syrian crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, The Obama Legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended The Obama Legacy.
A friend actually recommended The Obama Legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
We began yesterday to talk about trade slaves. We mentioned that according to history, the idea itself started in 1492 when Christopher Columbus set sail to discover New World, and voila, discover America. In fact, even up to today, we still have a holiday called Columbus Day. Now, record suggests that slavery, the trade, started in that year, meaning that it lasted at least 373 years, because according to historical record, it started in that year, the Christopher Columbus time, and ended in 1865 with the, well, emancipation, the Civil War here in America. In case you don't remember what it was, the Civil War was between two sides of the country, the North and the South. The South wanted to keep slavery around. The North, well, actually, Abraham Lincoln wanted to abolish slavery, but the South say, no, we're not gonna let that happen. But the North decide to
side with President Abraham Lincoln, and civil war erupted. Now, needless to point out that the South lost, obviously. That's why we no longer have slavery in the country. But here in the United States, according to record, the first slave, the first boat of slaves that came here was in 1619. That was in Jamestown, Virginia. 20 African slaves was brought to America in 1619 in Jamestown, which was at that time a British colony. And since then, trade slave has been going on until 1865. Now, I want to address a very grim part of this, because the understanding of why we have racism in the country, number one, but why it lingers mostly in the South, requires understanding of why that is. Why is the North? It's not to, this is not to say there is no racism, no discrimination in the North, but it's tapered. It's not as widespread as it is in the South. And if you follow this program, the War on Blacks, the trade slave, and as we explaining it, it will become very clear why the South is still so much racism in the South. And it seems like it's almost impossible to get that out of the way. As mentioned, everything that you're trying to figure out, everything you're trying to understand, follow the money. So we're going to follow the path of the money to try to understand why that is in the South at this point. Why we're still talking about racism, that much discrimination, when in fact there is no more slavery. Abolished 1865. Now, when we say slavery was abolished, that doesn't mean everything was hunky-dory, like everything was rosy for blacks. In fact, it wasn't. A lot of blacks lost their life following the emancipation. So it wasn't really that good. If you remember that very late in the game, in fact in the 20th century, that the legislative body had to pass a civil rights acts, voting acts, and all that was in a sense to try to help to level the playing field for blacks. Because despite the fact that there was no more slavery, but the behavior of whites, especially mostly in the South, continue to be really very bad in relation to blacks. But I always have to ask the question, and we see it even in the behavior of whenever you meet a white individual who is racist or discriminate or inclined to be in that category, always more prompt to be very defensive, very argumentative when it comes to issues about race relations. And also always ready to blame blacks for the problem. And as we continue the conversation, let's call it a study on trade, slave trade, you will find out that you will start to understand why whites who hates blacks so much why they do. And those who are more or less sympathizers of blacks' predicament, why that is as well. We going to follow the money because it's always easy to really understand what's going on when you're actually looking at it through the prism, through the financial prism. This is what used to be posted, flyers, whenever cargoes of blacks, they used to call Negroes, were coming, and I suppose probably in Europe as well. But this is a sample of a flyer that would be distributed in the community, white community obviously, and to let them know that there's going to be a cargo of Negroes that is coming. And of course, if they're interested in buying, because that's what blacks were merchandise. And if they have money, they're interested in buying whatever they were interested in, whether it's men, women, children, then to be ready. So the flyer is almost like when an event, any kind of event, like a regular event, there is going to be dancing, there is going to be a celebration, there is going to be a party. They put flyers out. Same idea. That boat filled with Negroes that they rounded from Africa. They chase, they kill. Those they couldn't capture, they kill. And those they finally capture, they put chains in their feet and tie their hands behind their back, especially the men. Put them on the bottom part of a boat to travel thousands of miles to come to America. And as I mentioned yesterday, quite a few of them would die during the journey because the predicament that they had to travel in, not only bound in chain together, and the trip would last really weeks. But it is blacks who are criminal. You listen to whites, especially the racists, those who discriminate, because as I mentioned before, the reason that the conversation about race relation in America never happened is because both sides would rather stay in their comfort zone, because it is a difficult thing to talk about. Now, I understand that the white people who are still racist and discriminate today, they most likely were not the one doing those trades. Their great-grandparents, their parents, their ancestors were. And most likely, they may become aware of that very fact, that great-grandfather or great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was at the center of doing those kind of things, and pass it down to great-great-grandfather, to grandfather, and so on to father. And now those individuals are well aware of their particular predicament and go straight to trade slaves, slave trades. Just to put it in perspective for you, when Donald Trump was 17 years old, he was being groomed by his father to take over the real estate business
And one of the aspects of what he learned from his father is discrimination. At 17 years old, I'm sure that it may have happened prior, but that's what we have on record that can put Donald Trump at that time in that example at 17, which means really even before that, he must have observed his father doing things that clearly say that his father discriminated against blacks. But we have on record that Donald Trump was 17 years old when he was right in the midst of his father discriminating against blacks, and he saw how the father tried to get out of it. So that's how those things pass from one generation to the other. So those people, those whites today who discriminate who are racist, they weren't there during those trades when slave blacks were being traded as merchandise, but their grandparents, their ancestors were doing those things. So the sentiment passed down from one generation to the other. And today, those individuals are, for the most part, the type of individual who are racist, who discriminate. And as you will see later, they justify that because of, well, you'll see why. Because we're going to follow the money, and you're going to see why whites who discriminate against black, whites who are so racist, why they feel so, they have so much resentment for blacks. In fact, once we take a look at those details, you have to be puzzled as to why in the world that individual or those individuals would feel that way about people that they mistreated, people that they torture, they kill, they overworked. And now they are more upset than the people that they inflicted all those pains on. So there are reasons why this conversation about race relation in America is so difficult, because it has always been that way, that there are millions of whites who are racist, who discriminate, and who wanted things to stay the way things were. Blacks are slave. Blacks stay in their place, continue to work the field, continue to bring them money. But there are also millions of whites who sympathize with blacks' predicament and fought side by side with blacks to end slavery. So race relation discussion in America is difficult. That's understood. That's why you cannot just have a one-size-fits-all when you're talking about whites. Because it's not the same. Now, I have to throw a wrench into this conversation, because whites who were mostly in the North were more inclined to be sympathizers of blacks' predicament, of blacks' plight. Whites in the South, they would kill a black who tried to escape from working the field. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, they were also Christian. I'll be right back. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. every Saturday. And every weekday at 2 p.m. This is the Fourth Branch.
Common sense in a world of chaos.
This program will resume in just a moment. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. I do thank you for spending the time with me while we debating this very important topic, war on blacks, and also democracy in America. We will continue to follow the money because, as mentioned earlier, in order to understand the predicament the country is in about any particular topic, you have to delve into that topic without any political agenda. And here at the Fourth Branch, we do not have a political agenda. The ultimate objective for us is to achieve a more perfect union. And that can only be achieved by removing the biggest obstacle, ignorance. And because racism, discrimination, this is a topic that is very sensitive. It is not talked about, as you must have seen here in the country, especially the past couple of years. Every time a unarmed black man is gunned down, really pretty much executed by a police officer, we have protests on the street, which lasted a couple of days, a lot of talk on TV, on radio, and then everything, it's over. There is no more conversation, although during the time of the protest, you have a bunch of quote-unquote experts that come and say, we have to have a conversation about this, we have to have a conversation about that, because there is a disconnect. And beyond the couple of days of protests, everything is over. But the war on blacks continue. And we pick the expression war on blacks because what it suggests is exactly what is happening to the blacks. War suggests casualties. And yes, the war that's being waged on blacks has caused many casualties. Those that we, the public, have been aware of, protesting for. For instance, when Michael Brown was gunned down in Missouri, when that gentleman was choked off in New York, when Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida, and of course the list goes on and on. We always have protests that says this is unjust, this is unfair. Those are casualties, no doubt. But we, the public, never really care about other casualties that are directly related to those physical casualties. Because obviously, after an individual is gunned down, that's the physical casualties. But left behind, more casualties, emotional casualties, psychological casualties, financial casualties, because the individual that is gunned down by the police officer, we only take into account the fact that one individual was killed. But what we never take into account is the fact that there is a river of casualty left behind. Emotional casualty. The family members could be kids, wives, parents, grandparents. Emotional casualties, psychological casualties. Some people will take years before they can get over this type of loss. And of course, you have the financial casualties, because every time that a physical casualty occurs, it always accompanied with financial casualties. And yes, it has been a war on blacks. And the reason it continues is because it is ignored. It is not talked about because it's too sensitive to talk about. And that's the reason we at the Fourth Branch make it a permanent part of our programming to talk about, to show the various aspects of life, the various corners of our society that have been waging a war on blacks, and how casualties have been mounting, and society has turned a blind eye. Thank you for watching. I hope you can join me again tomorrow when we continue the conversation on how to perfect the union. Have a good afternoon. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events, as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Join me on our next social media broadcast. See you then. Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.